Me and Nikki, me and Nikki and I continued to be in a relationship throughout the summer. We continued to be close and spent time with each other. I loved her. I did not want to break up with her. But at the same time, I wasn't really quite sure if I wasn't really sure if this was going to really work long term. I started to think hard about it in the back of my mind after a while. Believing that I was going to have a baby with Nikki made me realize the seriousness of making choices. I've always been bad. I've always found sometimes I'm not good at making choices. I tend to make choices. I sometimes make choices without fully thinking about the consequences. Sometimes I'm kind of spur of the moment. I think it's common for people that have Asperger's syndrome to sometimes make choices without fully thinking about them. I think it's part of the reason why this happens is because our mind is wired to hyper-focus on one thing at a time, and this makes making choices a bad symptom of this problem. I, however, think this problem can be corrected by learning how to get in the habit of thinking about things. Get in the habit of thinking about things first before making a decision about something. My dad and stepmom found out that I was engaged with Nikki. They weren't upset when they found out, but they were definitely not supportive of the relationship. In their opinion, they definitely thought this relationship wasn't going to be good and long term. They knew that she was slow, and they were concerned that I was going to sell my life short because of it. I thought about breaking up with Nikki during the summer, but I was afraid to break her heart. Nikki was often depressed and sometimes suicidal. I felt like I was Nikki's only hope for happiness. I was afraid that if I left Nikki, she would become extremely depressed and possibly suicidal. This would lead me to such a guilt that would probably bring a guilt that would be almost unbearable to handle. At times, I thought that maybe I should be there for her in spite of her limitations it would bring. I've loved Nikki and adored her so much, and I thought she was beautiful in spite of her mental disability. However, whenever I thought about staying with her for the rest of my life, I always felt this lingering feeling about this decision, an unease. I always saw multiple signs telling me to end the relationship, even from my friends. Most of my friends didn't exactly like her, unfortunately, and how this relationship was affecting me. I didn't see my Asperger's friends as much when I saw her, and I hardly ever got to see Boucher. She constantly wanted to see me, and it was like I couldn't do anything else. I finally broke up with her. I thought long and hard one day, and it was around the fall. I decided to honestly tell her face to face that she was amazing, but the relationship wasn't going to work out long term because of various reasons, such as school. It was not easy to do. It took a lot of courage. She was upset, but fortunately, things weren't as bad as I thought it would be. She actually took it pretty well. Some kind of unusual blessing happened that helped our breakup not be so devastating too, especially for her. This blessing was we became friends with benefits. I always learned that having friends with benefits often I always learned that from other people that being friends with benefits was always not a good thing, and it often led to disaster. But it seemed like with us, this was an exception. We still hung out, we kissed, and we were still close, but we just weren't in a relationship. Being friends with benefits allowed our emotional closeness to kind of like slowly withdraw to a slow enough level that it wasn't hurtful, but still remained a good thing. I learned that whenever you're in a situation with someone such as a romantic relationship and it's causing your life to suffer, but you're afraid to stop it because it could affect them more, still don't continue it. It may seem like the other person might get upset, and maybe they will but in the long run, it's better off for both. I also realized that when things seem like they could be a disaster, things will often work out in unexpected ways. Thoroughly thinking and planning ahead before making a choice helps too. I think praying makes this happen as well. I learned to not underestimate the power of prayer. Sometimes a prayer can fix a problem that would seem impossible to fix in other ways you couldn't even imagine. Once I realized that, I started realizing I needed to start praying for my mom more. My mom increasingly started becoming more of an unhappy person, and I started getting worried about her. My mother completely gave up on trying to spiritually awaken. I tried to stop her from making that decision, but she refused. Whenever I told her about my spiritual progress and said something that could help her, she would yell at me and say spiritual stuff is crazy. My mom started becoming ultra resentful to my family too. My uncles and other people she knew. She often wrote nasty letters to my dad's stepmom and my sister and uncles. Whenever I'd visit her, she often would switch moods and get into terrible fits. She would often yell at me and say terrible things about my family. Sometimes she would say things to me like, I'm odd, I'm selfish, and that I'm an insult to her life. In spite of what she said, I felt like I was the only one who could understand her and why she was upset all the time. I felt like she took a lot of mean beating from people throughout her life, and now she's coming to terms with it, and all the hurt and resentment is now coming to the surface. I think she also gave up hope on spiritually growing. I think she's probably upset about that. I think she probably got overwhelmed and wasn't sure how to do it, so she quit. And I think now she's really resenting that. I wanted to help her get her faith back spiritually, but it was hard to do because she refused to believe it now. I could see how much it was making her suffer. The last thing I ever wanted to do is see that happen to me. My dad worked at Delphi and they were laying off workers. As a result, he decided to search for another job and found a job in South Carolina. My dad and stepmom decided to move down to South Carolina and have me move with them. When I heard about that, I was extremely upset because I did not want to leave all my friends behind. I tried to find ways to flee from this opportunity, but soon realized moving with them and leaving Michigan was the only option. I couldn't go back to Kettering, and I was not able to make enough money to support myself working a minimum wage job. The workload was too hard for Kettering to keep up, so I decided to drop out of the school. I helped my dad and stepmom pack up, and I was not looking forward to moving. I hung out with Nikki for the last few nights and had a fun New Year's Eve celebration with all my friends. I spent a special night with my Asperger's friends I met in my sophomore year of high school, Scott, Jeff, and Hari. We watched Apollo 13 and then I had to leave. They all gave me a very sweet farewell. And it's something the way they said goodbye was just so touching. When I walked out of the house and went in my car, I cried, and I rarely ever cry. I then went over to Dave's house and said goodbye to him. He, however, kind of made me feel good because he says, you know, goodbyes are not really goodbyes. We could always see each other, even if you live in South Carolina. That night I slept at Nikki's house for the last time. I really enjoyed the feeling of sleeping next to her in a level that I never enjoyed before. I started to wish that I enjoyed it to that level before. I learned that whenever you really enjoy something and not take it for granted, just pretend that it is the last time and you'll experience it. I almost cried the next morning saying goodbye to Nikki, but I stayed strong and held it together. I left Michigan that night. That day, while driving off from Michigan with my dad and my stepmom following separate cars, I thought about the 6 years in Michigan and how amazing overall it was and how much I grew. I felt like I was taking a significant transition in my life once again and wondered what my life in this new state of South Carolina would be like. I had no idea what it looked like, never mind the possible people and possible experiences it could bring into this unique, unopened future that awaited for me.